John Deere built a reputation on green paint, reliability, and machines that farmers could trust for decades. But not every tractor wearing that iconic color lived up to the legend. Some were underpowered disasters. Others broke down so often that farmers swore they'd never buy green again. Today, we're counting down the 13 worst John Deere tractors ever created. From hydraulic nightmares to transmissions that failed under load, from electronics that cost fortunes to repair, to machines so outdated they were obsolete the day they left the factory. These aren't the tractors in the brochures. These are the machines that damaged reputations, cost farmers money, and proved that even Deere could get it wrong when engineering failed or when bean counters made decisions that operators would pay for in broken equipment and lost time. Number 13, John Deere 5103, 2000s. The John Deere 5103 takes the 13th position as a 2000s-era tractor, featuring 50 horsepower from a diesel engine with weak transmission and poor build quality in some markets, creating a machine that farmers in online forums often list among Deere's worst, despite the model being relatively recent. The 50 horsepower should have been adequate for small to medium operations, requiring a utility tractor capable of handling implements and tasks that compact tractors couldn't manage, but that didn't justify purchasing larger machines, costing substantially more. But the 5103's problems meant that the power on paper didn't translate into reliable capability when transmissions failed or when build quality issues created breakdowns that left tractors in shops rather than in fields during critical seasons when every day mattered. The weak transmission was the primary complaint, with farmers reporting that the gearbox couldn't handle loads that competing tractors managed without issues, creating situations where transmissions failed, prematurely requiring expensive repairs or replacements that shouldn't have been necessary on tractors with relatively low hours, and that created costs exceeding what buyers had expected when purchasing what they thought would be reliable John Deere equipment. The poor build quality varied by market, with some regions receiving tractors that were assembled properly, while others received machines that had issues from the beginning, suggesting inconsistent manufacturing or quality control problems that allowed substandard tractors leaving factories and reaching customers, who discovered problems only after purchase and after warranties expired, leaving them responsible for repairs. Forum complaints revealed 5,103 failures, exposing design flaws, costly repairs, and unmet John Deere reliability expectations, leaving the model remembered as a trust-damaging disappointment for buyers. Number 12, John Deere 720, 1956 through 58. The John Deere 720 takes the 12th position as a two-cylinder tractor from the late 1950s, featuring 65 horsepower from a diesel engine with hard starting and outdated design, leading to the model being quickly replaced by the modern 730, addressing the problems. The two-cylinder configuration was traditional for John Deere, with the company building two-cylinder tractors for decades before transitioning to multi-cylinder designs during the late 50s and early 60s. But by the time the 720 was introduced, the design was already becoming obsolete as competitors offered smoother-running four-cylinder and six-cylinder engines that were easier to start and that provided power delivery that was more refined than the distinctive but crude two-cylinder thump that Deere tractors were known for. The hard starting was particularly problematic in cold weather when diesel fuel thickened and when two-cylinder engines were notoriously difficult to crank, requiring strong batteries, functioning glow plugs, and often requiring preheating or other measures that farmers in cold climates found frustrating and time-consuming, especially during winter when starting tractors was already challenging, and when the 720's problems made it worse than competing tractors that started more reliably. The outdated design extended beyond the engine to include the overall tractor configuration, with the 720 lacking features that newer tractors offered, and with the styling and the controls feeling dated compared to competitors who were modernizing equipment and who were offering ergonomics and capabilities that made the 720 seem like a relic from an earlier era, despite being newly manufactured. The quick replacement by the 730 reflected John Deere's recognition that the 720 wasn't competitive, and that continuing production would cost sales to competitors offering more modern equipment, leading to the 730 being introduced with improvements, addressing the starting problems and updating the design, creating a tractor that was more successful and that avoided the 720's reputation for being difficult and outdated. The brief production run from 1956 through 58 meant that relatively few 720s were built compared to longer-running models, creating a tractor that is remembered more for being a transitional failure than for being a significant part of John Deere's history during the critical period when the company was moving away from two-cylinder designs toward the multi-cylinder tractors that would define the brand through subsequent decades. Number 11. John Deere 3350, 1980s. The John Deere 3350 takes the 11th position as a 1980s tractor featuring 100 horsepower from a six-cylinder diesel with hydraulic pump failures and electrical issues, creating a machine that farmers reported experiencing frequent breakdowns despite the model being from an era when reliability should have been better than what the 3350 delivered. The 100 horsepower positioned the 3350 as a mid-range tractor, suitable for operations requiring serious capability but not needing the largest tractors that John Deere offered, creating a market segment where reliability was critical, because buyers in this category were typically commercial operations that couldn't afford downtime during planting and harvesting, when every hour mattered and when breakdowns created losses, exceeding repair costs through missed opportunities for completing work when conditions were optimal. The hydraulic pump failures were expensive and disruptive, with the pumps being essential for operating implements and for controlling the tractor's various systems, meaning that when pumps failed, the tractor became partially or completely unusable until repairs could be completed, requiring parts that might not be immediately available and requiring labor that added costs beyond just component prices. The electrical issues compounded the hydraulic problems, with the 3350 experiencing failures in wiring, in switches, and in other electrical components that were becoming more important as tractors incorporated more sophisticated systems requiring reliable electrical power and reliable control circuits that the 3350 apparently couldn't provide consistently. Frequent breakdowns plagued 3350 owners, damaging the model's reputation as farmers warned others about persistent hydraulic and electrical failures that made even attractively priced used examples risky purchases. Number 10. John Deere 1130, 1970s Europe. The John Deere 1130 takes the 10th position as a 1970s European market tractor, featuring approximately 60 horsepower from a four-cylinder diesel with poor hydraulics and weak clutch, creating a machine that was rarely seen outside Europe due to poor reputation limiting export and limiting adoption even in markets where the model was officially available. The 60 horsepower was adequate for European farming, which typically involved smaller fields and lighter implements compared to American agriculture. But even for European conditions, the 1130's hydraulics and clutch proved inadequate, creating frustrations among farmers who expected that John Deere equipment would perform reliably, regardless of whether it was designed for American or European markets. The poor hydraulics meant that the 1130s struggled to operate implements requiring substantial hydraulic flow or pressure, creating situations where equipment designed for tractors in the 60 horsepower class couldn't be used effectively with the 1130 because the hydraulic system couldn't provide what was needed for proper operation. The weak clutch failed prematurely or slipped under loads that it should have handled, creating a wear item that became a frequent replacement requirement, rather than being a component that would last for reasonable periods before needing service, adding operating costs and adding frustration for farmers who had to deal with clutch problems that better designed tractors avoided through using adequately sized components that could handle the torque that the engine could deliver. The European limitation reflected both the model's market assignment and the reality that the poor reputation prevented the 1130 from being exported to regions where it might have competed if it had been reliable and capable, but where John Deere recognized that selling problematic tractors would damage the brand's overall reputation, making it better to limit the 1130's distribution rather than allowing it to fail globally. The rarity outside Europe means that the 1130 is largely forgotten in American agricultural history, with most farmers never having seen one and never having heard of the model unless they had European connections or unless they researched John Deere's complete product line, including models that were market-specific and that never achieved the recognition or the sales that global models enjoyed. Number 9. John Deere 530, 1958 through 60. The John Deere 530 takes the 9th position as a late 1950s tractor, featuring 45 horsepower from a 2-cylinder engine with outdated design and weak hydraulics, creating a machine that was considered obsolete upon release, as the industry was moving toward multi-cylinder engines and more sophisticated hydraulic systems. The 1958 introduction came at the worst possible time, with competitors already offering 4-cylinder tractors that were smoother, more powerful, and more modern than the 530's 2-cylinder design that represented technology from earlier decades, when 2 cylinders were adequate, but that by the late 50s was clearly inferior to what competing manufacturers were building and what progressive farmers were demanding. The weak hydraulics meant that the 530 couldn't operate modern implements that increasingly relied on hydraulic power for functions that older equipment had managed mechanically or manually, creating a tractor that was limited to working with older implements or with implements specifically designed for tractors with minimal hydraulic capacity, restricting the 530's usefulness and making it unsuitable for operations that had invested in modern equipment, expecting to use it with any tractor providing adequate power. The obsolescence upon release created a situation where the 530 was outdated before farmers even had chances to evaluate it, with the market recognizing immediately that the tractor represented old technology that John Deere should have moved beyond, rather than continuing to produce when competitors had demonstrated that multi-cylinder designs were superior. Its short 1958 to 1960 run signaled poor sales, marking John Deere's acceptance that the 530 and 2-cylinder era were obsolete against competitive multi-cylinder tractors. Industry-wide competition. Number 8. John Deere 8430, 1970s. The John Deere 8430 takes the 8th position as a 1970s 4-wheel drive tractor, featuring 150 to 175 horsepower from a diesel engine with engine overheating and poor reliability in field conditions, leading to the model being replaced quickly by the improved 8440, addressing the problems. The high horsepower positioned the 8430 as a serious machine for large operations requiring maximum pulling capacity for heavy tillage or for working extensive acreages, where smaller tractors would be inadequate. But the overheating and reliability problems meant that the power couldn't be used effectively when engines couldn't maintain operating temperatures or when breakdowns left tractors sitting idle during critical seasons, when every day mattered for completing work before weather changed or before crop windows closed. The engine overheating occurred during heavy work when cooling systems couldn't dissipate heat that the engine generated under sustained high loads, creating situations where operators had to reduce speeds or reduce loads or stop working entirely, allowing engines to cool before resuming, destroying productivity and creating frustrations when expensive high-horsepower tractors couldn't perform the sustained heavy work that they were purchased to accomplish. The poor reliability in field conditions suggested that the 8430 hadn't been adequately tested in real-world agriculture before being released, with problems emerging only after farmers put tractors to work and discovered that components failed or that systems couldn't handle the dust, the heat, the vibration, and the loads that fieldwork imposed on equipment expected to operate reliably in harsh environments. The quick replacement by the 8440 demonstrated John Deere's recognition that the 8430 was failing and that continuing to sell problematic tractors would damage the company's reputation in the critical high-horsepower segment, where buyers had choices and where poor experiences would drive them toward competitors offering more reliable equipment. The improvements in the 8440 addressed the overheating through better cooling system design and addressed the reliability problems through using more durable components and through better testing before release, creating a tractor that succeeded where the 8430 had failed, and that restored John Deere's credibility in the 4-wheel drive category that was increasingly important for large-scale farming. Number 7. John Deere 7000 series, early 1990s. The John Deere 7000 series takes the 7th position as an early 1990s tractor line, ranging from 140 to 200 horsepower, with electronics prone to failure, creating costly repairs, and creating farmer complaints about downtime and complexity that simpler mechanical tractors avoided. The introduction of sophisticated electronics was intended to improve performance and efficiency, and to provide features that mechanical controls couldn't offer. But the early implementations in the 7000 series proved unreliable, with components failing, and with repairs requiring specialized diagnostic equipment and specialized knowledge that many dealers and independent mechanics lacked, making repairs expensive and time-consuming. The prone-to-failure electronics included sensors, controllers, and wiring that were supposed to manage engine performance, transmission operation, and implement control, but that instead became sources of problem when components failed, leaving tractors with reduced capability or leaving them completely inoperable until repairs could diagnose problems and replace failed parts that might require ordering from distant warehouses rather than being available locally. The costly repairs reflected both the component prices and the labor involved in diagnosing electronic problems that weren't obvious, like mechanical failures, where broken parts could be seen and where causes were usually apparent, but that instead required systematic testing and analysis, determining which of many possible components had failed, creating situations where repair bills climbed as technicians spent hours troubleshooting before even beginning actual repairs. The downtime complaints were serious, with farmers reporting that 7000 series tractors spent too much time in shops and not enough time in fields, creating situations where expensive equipment couldn't be used during critical periods and where operations had to rent replacement tractors or delay work, waiting for repairs to be completed and for tractors to return to service. The complexity concerns reflected farmer frustration with tractors that required computers for diagnosis and that couldn't be repaired by operators using basic tools and mechanical knowledge that had been sufficient for maintaining older tractors. But that was inadequate for addressing electronic problems requiring specialized equipment and training that only dealers possessed, creating dependence that farmers resented and that made the 7000 series unpopular, despite the performance advantages that the electronics supposedly provided. Number 6. John Deere 4320, 1970s. The John Deere 4320 takes the 6th position as a 1970s tractor featuring 116 horsepower from a diesel engine with transmission issues and heavy fuel consumption, creating a machine that was overshadowed by the more reliable 4020 that farmers preferred, despite the 4320 theoretically offering more power and more features. The 116 horsepower should have made the 4320 attractive for operations needing more capability than the 4020's lower output provided. But the transmission problems and the fuel consumption issues meant that whatever advantages the extra power provided were negated by reliability concerns and by operating costs that made the 4320 expensive to own and operate compared to alternatives that were more dependable and more economical. The transmission issues created situations where gears failed, or where shifting became difficult, or where other problems emerged that required repairs, interrupting work, and creating costs that shouldn't have been necessary on tractors that were relatively new and that should have been in their most reliable years. The heavy fuel consumption meant that operating costs were higher than expected, with the 4320 burning more diesel per hour or per acre than competing tractors, or than the 4020 that farmers compared the 4320 against when deciding which tractor to purchase, or which to keep when considering whether to trade for different equipment. The overshadowing by the 4020 was complete, with the older model being so well regarded and so reliable that farmers chose to keep their 4020s rather than upgrading to 4320s that were supposed to be improvements, but that were actually steps backward in terms of dependability and economy. The 4320's failure to replace the 4020 successfully created a situation where John Deere had to continue supporting the older model longer than planned because demand remained strong, even as the company tried steering buyers toward the newer tractor that was supposed to be superior, but that the market rejected after experiencing or hearing about the transmission and fuel consumption problems that made the 4320 undesirable despite its higher horsepower rating. Number 5. John Deere 4000, 1969 through 72. The John Deere 4000 takes the 5th position as a late 1960s through early 70s tractor featuring 95 horsepower from a 6-cylinder diesel, with the model being a stripped-down version of the 4020, lacking durability and being seen as a cost-cutting misstep that damaged John Deere's reputation. The 4000 was created to offer a lower-priced alternative to the 4020 for buyers wanting 6-cylinder power but not wanting to pay for all the features that the 4020 included. But the cost-cutting went too far, with John Deere removing or downgrading components in ways that compromised reliability and durability, creating a tractor that was cheaper initially, but that cost more long-term through repairs and through reduced lifespan compared to 4020s that were built more robustly. The stripped-down nature meant that the 4000 lacked features that farmers had come to expect on John Deere tractors, including comfort items, convenience features, and some of the heavier-duty components that made 4020s legendary for durability and for ability to accumulate enormous hours while remaining productive and reliable. The lack of durability became apparent as 4000's accumulated hours and developed problems that 4020s didn't experience at similar ages or similar usage levels, revealing that the cost-cutting had weakened the tractors in ways that weren't obvious when they were new. But that became apparent over time, as components failed prematurely, or as wear occurred faster than it should have on equipment that was supposed to last for decades. The cost-cutting misstep reflected poor judgment by John Deere management, who apparently believed that buyers would accept reduced quality in exchange for lower prices, but who discovered that farmers valued reliability and durability over initial purchase savings, and who would rather pay more for 4020s that would last than buy cheaper 4000s that would require more maintenance and would need replacing sooner. The brief production run from 1969 through 72 reflected poor sales and reflected recognition that the 4000 wasn't succeeding and that continuing production would damage the brand's reputation as word spread that the model was inferior to the 4020 and that buyers should avoid the 4000 despite its lower price. Number 4. John Deere 30032E pre-2020 models. The John Deere 30032E takes the 4th position as a compact utility tractor from before 2020, featuring 31.1 horsepower from a diesel engine with weak hydraulics, poor loader capacity, and PTO disengagement problems, creating a machine that was criticized for lacking the grunt that compact tractor buyers needed for actual work. The 31 horsepower should have been adequate for property maintenance, for light farming, and for the various tasks that compact tractor owners perform. But the weak hydraulics meant that implements requiring hydraulic power couldn't be operated effectively, and that loaders struggled to lift loads that competing compact tractors handled without problems. The poor loader capacity was particularly frustrating because front-end loaders are primary reasons that many buyers purchase compact tractors, expecting to use them for moving materials, for loading trucks, and for the numerous tasks where lifting capability is essential, but where the 30032E's combination of weak hydraulics and inadequate loader design meant that the tractor couldn't perform these basic functions effectively, leaving buyers disappointed and looking for alternatives that could actually do the work that they had purchased tractors to accomplish. The PTO disengagement problems created safety concerns and operational difficulties when the power takeoff wouldn't disengage properly, leaving implements running when they should have stopped or creating situations where operators had to struggle with controls that should have functioned reliably, but that apparently didn't on the 30032E. The criticism for lacking grunt reflected widespread recognition among compact tractor buyers and reviewers that the 30032E simply didn't have the capability that its specifications suggested, with real-world performance being disappointing compared to what the horsepower rating and the feature list implied should have been possible, creating a reputation problem that made the model difficult to sell once word spread about its limitations. The pre-2020 designation is important because John Deere apparently addressed some problems in later versions, but the earlier models that established the 30032E's poor reputation remain in service and remain reminders of what happens when manufacturers build tractors that look capable on paper, but that fail to deliver in actual use. Number 3. John Deere 2840 1970s. The John Deere 2840 takes the 3rd position as a 1970s tractor featuring 90 horsepower from a diesel engine with hydraulic system prone to failure and overheating issues, creating a machine that farmers considered unreliable for heavy work, despite the tractor being designed for exactly that purpose. The 90 horsepower positioned the 2840 in a class where buyers expected robust construction and reliable performance for commercial agriculture. But the hydraulic failures and the overheating meant that the tractor couldn't deliver consistent capability and couldn't be trusted for sustained heavy work that was exactly what farmers in this market segment needed equipment to accomplish. The hydraulic system failures occurred when pumps, valves, hoses, or other components broke, leaving the tractor without the hydraulic power needed for operating implements or for controlling the tractor's various systems, creating situations where expensive repairs were required and where work stopped until hydraulics could be restored through replacing failed parts and through bleeding air from systems, and through other procedures that took time and that cost money beyond just component prices. The overheating issues meant that the engine couldn't maintain proper operating temperatures during sustained work, forcing operators to reduce loads or to stop working, allowing temperatures to drop before resuming, destroying productivity and creating frustrations. When tractors that were supposed to handle heavy work continuously instead required constant attention to temperature gauges and required stopping before damage occurred from excessive heat. The unreliability assessment came from farmers who purchased 2840s, expecting John Deere quality, and who discovered that the model didn't meet standards that the brand had established through decades of building dependable equipment, creating disappointment and creating anger when tractors failed during critical seasons, and when repairs consumed time and money that should have been spent farming rather than dealing with equipment that should have been working, but that instead was breaking down with depressing regularity. The 2840's failure damaged John Deere's reputation in the 90 horsepower class and created opportunities for competitors to capture sales. From farmers who had been loyal to Deere, but who switched brands after experiencing or hearing about the 2840's problems, and who decided that green paint didn't guarantee reliability when the engineering and manufacturing didn't support the brand's reputation. Number 2, John Deere 1010, 1960s. The John Deere 1010 takes the second position as a 1960s tractor, featuring approximately 36 horsepower from a 4-cylinder engine with transmission and hydraulic issues, and being underpowered compared to rivals, leading to a short production run due to farmer complaints that made the model unsustainable. The 36 horsepower was marginal for the work that small to medium farms required, creating a tractor that struggled with implements and tasks that competing tractors in the same class handled adequately, revealing that John Deere had miscalculated what was needed or had compromised too much in pursuit of other design goals, leaving the 1010 unable to compete effectively in its intended market segment. The transmission issues created situations where gears failed, or where shifting became problematic, or where other problems emerged that required repairs and that created reliability concerns that buyers in the small tractor market couldn't afford, because these were typically operations with limited budgets and limited ability to absorb repair costs or to deal with downtime when tractors were essential for completing work and when alternatives weren't available. The hydraulic problems compounded the transmission issues, with the 1010 apparently having inadequate hydraulic capacity or having components that failed, creating additional reliability concerns and creating additional frustrations for farmers who had chosen John Deere, expecting better quality than what the 1010 delivered. The underpowered assessment came from direct comparisons with competing tractors that offered similar or better power from engines that were more reliable and that were packaged in tractors that were overall more capable than the 1010, proving that John Deere's offering simply wasn't competitive in its class and couldn't be sold successfully when buyers had alternatives that were superior. The short production run reflected poor sales and reflected the speed with which John Deere recognized that the 1010 was failing and that continuing production would waste resources and would damage the brand's reputation in the small tractor segment, where first impressions and word of mouth were critical for success, and where the 1010's problems created negative impressions that took years to overcome even after the model was discontinued and replaced with better designs. Number 1. John Deere 2010, 1960s. The John Deere 2010 takes the top position as the worst John Deere tractor ever created, featuring approximately 46 horsepower from a 4-cylinder engine available in gas or diesel with weak hydraulics, poor reliability, and hard-to-service engine, creating a machine that was universally disliked and that is often cited as Deere's worst tractor in discussions among farmers and enthusiasts who remember the model's failures. The 2010 was introduced during the critical period when John Deere was transitioning from 2-cylinder to multi-cylinder tractors, but the execution was so poor that the 2010 became an embarrassment rather than being the successful modern tractor that the company needed for competing against manufacturers who had already made the transition successfully. The weak hydraulics meant that the 2010 couldn't operate implements that required adequate hydraulic flow or pressure, limiting the tractor's usefulness and creating situations where farmers had to use older equipment or had to forego certain implements entirely because the 2010 simply couldn't provide what was needed for modern farming. That was increasingly relying on hydraulic power for controlling equipment and for performing functions that had previously been manual or mechanical. The poor reliability manifested through frequent breakdowns, affecting multiple systems, including the transmission, the electrical system, the cooling system, and various other components that failed with depressing regularity, creating a tractor that spent more time being repaired than being used, and that cost more to maintain than it should have cost, creating economic losses beyond just the frustration and inconvenience that constant breakdowns created. The hard-to-service engine was perhaps the most frustrating aspect, with the 2010's power plant being designed in ways that made routine maintenance and repairs difficult, requiring removing other components for accessing parts that should have been easily reachable or requiring special tools or procedures that mechanics unfamiliar with the 2010 wouldn't know, creating situations where service took longer and cost more than it should have for tasks that were straightforward on better-designed tractors. The universal dislike came from farmers who purchased 2010s and who experienced the problems firsthand, and from mechanics who had to work on them and who recognized the design flaws that made the tractor both unreliable and difficult to repair, creating a combination that made the 2010 genuinely terrible, rather than just being mediocre or disappointing. The citation as Deere's worst tractor appears consistently in discussions about John Deere's history, with the 2010 being the model that is almost universally identified as the company's biggest failure and biggest embarrassment, representing a low point that John Deere had to overcome through building better tractors and through restoring the reputation that the 2010 had damaged among farmers who had trusted the brand and who had been betrayed by receiving a tractor that was fundamentally flawed and that never should have been released in the condition that it was in when it left the factory and reached farms, where its problems became apparent and where its failures created losses and frustrations that lasted far longer than the brief period when the 2010 was in production before being discontinued and replaced by designs that avoided its mistakes. These 13 worst John Deere tractors ever created prove that even legendary brands stumble when engineering fails, or when cost-cutting goes too far, or when designs aren't tested adequately before reaching farmers who trust that green paint means quality, but who discover that sometimes it just means disappointment. From the universally hated 2010 to compact tractors lacking grunt, from electronic nightmares to transmissions that failed under load, these tractors taught John Deere hard lessons about what happens when standards slip and when tractors don't deliver what the brand promises. Which failure surprised you most? Drop your answer below and subscribe for more agricultural history that doesn't hide the truth about machines that wore green paint but failed to live up to everything that color is supposed to represent.